Go. Hello and welcome to week 4 of Friendly Fire. I think it's week 4. It's the penultimate, otherwise known as. And today we're doing the most thorny of the issues, probably the most meaty and interesting, and the most theoretically complex. This is Pyrotheology and politics time. And we're going to be looking at identity, terms like universality, and what politics proper means. Who are the oppressed? What does it mean to stand with the oppressed? What is Christianity's and radical theology's relationship to the oppressed? So these are all the things we're going to get into. Catherine Sarah Moody's article, you obviously don't have it. You've just got my response, which was a very personal response, because to be honest, I couldn't address everything in the article. I didn't have enough space. They only gave me a few hundred words to respond, and so there was no way, because Catherine has done a very careful analysis of the different ways I have looked at this thing called suspended space that we're going to be talking about, and how that's developed in my work over the years. And then she, gave a subtle, critique of that and engaged in a critical dialogue with that. And these are all things that I can't really get into because it would take us weeks. She's referencing various thinkers like Alain Badiou, Slavoj Žižek, a guy called Rancière, different political theorists who are exploring kind of the idea of the political. So what I want to do is I want to try and sum up in about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, the kind of like the way I envisage the pyrotheology in relation to politics and identity. And then we'll have obviously a chance to chat about it. So I want to start off with an old story from Northern Ireland you may have heard me tell before, about this guy who was in the IRA, and he dies and he goes to heaven. Now, in the IRA, they used to have this technique where they would plant explosives in buildings, and then they would phone up the police, and they would say, you've got 5 minutes to get everybody out, you've got 10 minutes to get everybody out. Right? This happened a lot. This was a regular occurrence, whether you were in school, a shopping centre, or whatever. Sometimes there were bombs in the building, sometimes there wasn't. And so the story goes, he dies, he goes to heaven. He's waiting at the pearly gates, and St. Peter comes along with a big dusty book, slams it down in front of this guy Seamus, right? Opens it up and looks for his name. And eventually St. Peter looks up at him and says, listen, Seamus, you're not in the book. You're not getting in. You know the rules. And Seamus says to St. Peter, I'm not trying to get in. You've got 5 minutes to get out, right? Now, I remember that story being told when I was at school, and it was just like this funny little kind of story that came up through the Troubles. But more recently, I've been reflecting on it, and I think it captures the heart of pyrotheology. Now, in order to understand this, Christianity has always been a type of universalism. Right? There's this debate, weirdly, that you saw in the contemporary Christian world, which, by the way, in America is not very theological at all. Theology is not, it sounds terrible to say, but theology isn't done in seminaries. Mostly, some seminaries it is, but a lot of seminaries don't do theology. But this idea of, Christianity and universalism and how bad universalism is. But in a sense, Christianity has always been universalistic in a philosophical sense. In that, you could say that Paul was trying to say that what was going on within Judaism and with Christ and the Messiah was for everybody, Jew and Gentile, right? So it wasn't even a move from Jew to Gentile. It was an attempt to have something that included and encapsulated the Jew and the Gentile, which basically is everybody else. So that's a form of universalism. So in a sense, conservative Christianity has always been universalistic in this way. It said the message of Christianity is for everybody. It's not a particularistic religion. So like Islam or Judaism are particularistic in a sense, which means that you don't have to be a Jew or a Muslim. You have a place, even if you're not within that religion, from that religious perspective point. So if you meet a Jewish guy in New York on the side of the street they will ask you, are you Jewish? And if you say no, they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Because they're trying to, in a sense, speak to fellow Jews to bring them back into kind of orthodoxy. But you're a Gentile, you have a place, you're okay. Might not be as good a place, depending, I don't know, but you've got a place. It's a particular religion. And if you actually said, I'm not a Jew, but I'd like to become a Jew, that would be a nightmare for them. That would be like the last thing they'd want to hear. Is, oh God, it's going to be so difficult, right? Why did I have to get this Gentile? But Christianity is one of these things where, in a sense, for the conservative, it's for everybody. So you're on the street and you're trying to speak to, it's precisely the opposite. You're trying to speak to people who aren't Christians. Now, the negative side of that is, therefore, if you don't accept Christianity, you're nothing. So Christianity is everything. So the Christianity is for everyone. But if you don't accept it, you ultimately have no place. You're a nobody and nothing. Ultimately, hell is, in a sense, the location where you are excluded from any symbolic kind of representation. It's kind of, I think some people in the conservative world talk about hell as being the place where God is absent. The place of complete blackness, complete annihilation, or just ongoing nothingness. It is the place of absolute negation. And there's various interesting political versions of this. I can't remember the political leader who said, in my revolution, no human died. And then the journalist said, but like loads of people were killed and executed. And he said, oh, they weren't humans, they were dogs. Right? So, it's like, by definition, the outsider is a nobody and a nothing to be destroyed. Now, interestingly, within more liberal traditions, there's a form of universalism that's quite common, which is Christianity is a message for everybody, and everybody gets in at the end of the day, right? So, eventually everybody gets in, so everyone gets a seat at the table. Now, those are both universal. One is Christianity is universal in scope, but not in effectivity, in the sense of it doesn't bring everybody in. And two is it's universal in scope, and it affects everybody, it brings everybody in. Now, what I want to argue is pyrotheology is different. Pyrotheology argues that Christianity wants to get everybody out. Right? It's actually the opposite move. That the complete outsider, that's where God is. That's the radical message of Christianity, is that the outsider represents the sight of the divine, not the inside. Okay, now to understand this, we have to do a little bit of mind, kind of like games, right? Let's see. Okay, for Jean-Paul Sartre, he famously was in a cafe in Paris, and he was watching a waiter bring coffee to him. And Sartre writes about his experience of seeing this waiter bring the coffee. And it was a typical Parisian waiter in a very fancy Parisian coffee shop. This waiter was like doing everything a waiter would do. They were dressed to perfection in the outfit. The hair was perfect. The gestures were perfect. The way he carried the tray, the way he served the coffee. And Sartre writes about this and says, this waiter thinks he's a waiter, right? He thinks that he is identifying fully with his identity as a waiter, because look at like he's taking it so seriously. There's nothing in him that would give you the impression that he's tired, he has to do this for a job, he'll get fired if he doesn't, but he's playing the part. Now this person is like totally in their identity, and he calls this bad faith, because he says that to be a human being is different than being a dog. A dog is a dog, cat is a cat, a stone is a stone, but a human being is not a human being, in the sense of we have the word inhuman. To be human, you can be inhuman. To be human is to ask, what does it mean to be human? To be human means that you are, in a sense, always open to new possibilities, always open to new futures. You can't reduce yourself to a thingness. You are not at one with yourself. In psychoanalysis, this can be called the split subject. You're not at one with yourself, and that's actually part of what it means to be human. We do have identities. We take jobs up. we do certain things, but we're never fully reducible to those things. There's always ways to break open those identities, to change them, to corrupt them, to renew them. Now, in this sense, you could say that there is a universal, and the universal is we are all not reducible to our identities. There is something about us all that is not reducible to our identity in the social world. So basically what society tells you you are, right? We all have that. But there's a sense in which all of us fail to fully enact the social position we're given. But we mostly deny it. We mostly adopt the social positioning we have if it works for us, so we'll start with like people like me. It kind of works for me. I embrace the social position I've got to a greater or lesser extent, but Sartre calls that bad faith. I am refusing to acknowledge the authenticity of what it means to be human, which means to transcend that. Now, what's more important is that there are some people in society who completely adopt the place of no place, who have no symbolic identity within the system. So all of us, to a certain extent, kind of have problematic relationships with our identities. To some extent, we may deny it, we may avoid it, but it's kind of there to some extent. But some people have no place in the social sphere at all. They're the nobodies and the nothings, the complete outsiders. Right? This is what Karl Marx called the proletariat. And it's very precise to understand what he meant when he used this term proletariat. He didn't mean the working class in the way that we think of the working class today. He was thinking of the class of no class, the people who have no place in society, kind of the equivalent of a slave who is used by a system but has no symbolic value within that system. They are to be used, abused, cast aside. They have no rights. They experience the violence of the system, more so than anybody else. Now, because within society, there are lots of classes. If you have society as a circle, right, then within that big circle, there are small circles, different groupings, different kind of like kin, different family groups, different whatever, right, different identities. But there is also something else, and that is what is outside that circle. Now, this gets even more interesting because Immanuel Kant, I think it was Immanuel Kant, he talked about public and private, but he meant the exact opposite of what we mean today. We talk about the public square. The public square is what happens outside this house. The public square is what we engage in our everyday activity. It's when we go to work. It's when we buy things and sell things. That's the public square. But Kant called that the private square. He called that the realm of the private. Now, hopefully I'm getting this right. It's been a long time since I've read any of this stuff, but he calls that private. And then the opposite, what we call private, which would be in a pub, talking to people over a drink, you're kind of subtracted from the public square in some small social environment or a dinner party or something like that. We think of that as a private space. Kant called that public. Now, what I think he means by this is the public square always excludes people. And we don't really see the people it excludes. It might be the people who live in shanty towns in South America, or in trailer parks in the US, or in the factories in China, or in sweatshops in India, or whatever it is. It's the groups of people who actually are invisible. They're silenced. They don't have a place in the so-called public square because the so-called public square is private. It excludes certain people. But then certain spaces that we would think of as private, where we withdraw ourselves from the public square, they are actually more universal. They are the place where different classes and different types of people can meet and interact. And potentially, I suppose, can be places outside of the social regime and the social system, the place where our identities are challenged to some extent, the place where our identities are put into question in light of the other people that we meet. So I've made some notes to make sure I get this right, because this is all quite difficult stuff, right? Okay, so yeah, so that's the proletariat. The proletariat are the class of no class, the people who have no symbolic value, the people who are nobodies and nothings and are excluded from kind of participation in society at large. Right? But then certain small spaces on the edges of society act like pirate islands, like pirates with, you know, pirates on their shoulders, that kind of pirate. The pirate islands were, it's traditionally pirate islands were places within the map. There were territories, there were islands that were owned by, you know, the British Empire, for example, but they weren't under the power of the British Empire. They were places of radical autonomy and radical freedom. Within pirate islands, the idea was the pirates were made up of the downtrodden, the people who were used and abused, the nobodies and the nothings, the sailors who were basically just objects for the commerce of the day. And so to become a pirate was to identify as nothing, the nobodies and the nothings, to say, I am excluded from the social system, but we are creating a space within that. So technically, anybody could be a pirate. You know, there was equality. There was like a lot of sexual equality. There was a lot of equality of wage. There was healthcare. There was a tradition where every year the children would knock down any barriers that were built up between the different houses, so as to say we are all equal and we are one. Kind of like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where you're unified in the sense that you all are kind of outsiders. You all feel you're broken because of alcoholism, and you identify with that. You're the outsider, and you experience that. So these pirate islands are the type of where you become the proletariat. In those spaces, you become the universal. You signify a space outside of the symbolic system. And the reason why I think I said to you is outside of the recording, I texted my friend Jay Baker, it's because he told me once about a pub in the UK in comic book land called Time in a Ball. Time in a Ball, yeah. And there's some superhero called Squire, the Squire, and the Knight and the Squire. I suppose I think they were like equivalent of like British kind of Batman or something like that. But this pub was a pub where you could go, superheroes could go into and supervillains, and there was this magic over the pub that prevented you from fighting and using your superpowers. So it was where all the superheroes and supervillains went when they just wanted to drink and like just to chat and just to like chill out and relax, right? So the whole idea is you'd find the Joker in there, you'd find the Penguin, you'd find the Batman, and they'd all be just hanging around, having a drink, and everything would be great. That's kind of like the pirate island in a sense. That is this strange little space where you lay down all of that stuff for a little bit. And you experience the fact that you're more than and less than and other than the various identities that are given to you by society and put on you. So how does this connect to Christianity very quickly? Well, the crucifixion can be seen as, it was not simply a biological death. To be crucified did not mean you were simply killed. It was also a symbolic death. And before it was a biological death, it was a symbolic death. To be crucified meant you were no longer a citizen, so you were like no longer within the political regime. You had no longer the protection of the political system. You were cursed of God, so you were no longer part of the religious system. And you were put outside the city naked right? You were a nobody and nothing culturally. You were trash, because that's where you put the trash, outside the city. That's where the idea of hell comes from. So in one sense, you're put in hell, the place that I mentioned at the beginning, the place of the nobody, the nothing, no symbolic identity, etc. So in this way, you could say that to experience the crucifixion in terms of its symbolic sense is that represents the people who are cursed, of like you have no place within the religious system, no place within the political system, no place within the cultural system. So the cross represents the subtraction of yourself from society, from society's ideology. So the crucifixion represents the complete outsiders. And to identify with the crucifixion technically means to identify with those people who are the complete outsiders. And to identify with that part of ourselves, however small that is, that is a sign of rebellion against the symbolic system that we're in. Now you can see this very much throughout the New Testament, but like the conversion of Paul is very, very key, because Paul is persecuting this group of outsiders called the Christians. They are seen as these, errant Jews who should be just killed off, and then everything will go back to normal. And then Paul has this inner voice that says to him, "Why are you persecuting me?" Which is the psychoanalytic insight of like that the complete outsider, that the one that we're persecuting, that we think is the nobody and the nothing that we just want to get rid of. That's where God is. That's God. You're persecuting God when you attack the complete outsider. And that changes his life. That revolutionizes his life, and he starts to talk about a communities that transcend the various identities of his day: Jew, Gentile, slave, free, male, female. And he starts to go like, is there a way of transcending these identity markers of the day? But you also see it in Christ, where it says that the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. So the idea that Christ, Jesus, is the nobody, the nothing that we want to crucify in order to get back to God. But it turns out that Christ is God. The complete nobody, nothing, the complete outsider, the symbolically dead, is actually God. So this, I think, is part of the political power of pyrotheology, of radical theology, is to try to rediscover how the complete outsider, whoever that is, that we they occupy the site of God. And what we want to do, if we identify with the crucifixion, is to identify with that site, to be transformed by it, to learn from it, to be critiqued by it, to be ruptured by it. And that's the good news. That's why I try to turn around the whole social justice thing, where I say, instead of we are good news to the poor and the oppressed, but the poor and the oppressed are good news to us. You don't do social justice work because I have something wonderful to give. But actually, if I go to prisons, the prison system is where we put the nobodies and nothings, the complete outsiders. They are the scapegoat of our society. We scapegoat people, we put them behind bars, we put them behind walls. And when we go and we encounter those people, we encounter a problem within our society. They show us that there is a problem within our social system that we are not addressing. Because if Jean-Paul Sartre is right, that there is a sense in which we are not at one with ourselves. We are never fully identified with our identities. But that we try to avoid that in bad faith. We try to avoid that in so many different ways. Then the only thing we can do in avoiding that is to create scapegoats, people who embody the complete outsider. And that is the poor, the oppressed. That's racism and sexism, the various violence that we see in society. It'll be different people at different historical times, but different concrete people become the embodiment of the lack, the nothing that we cannot look at within ourselves. But if we are able as a society to look at that lack, the idea is we are able to make that will have an impact. With scapegoats will disappear whenever we're able to embrace the lack in ourselves. And concretely speaking, this is connected with psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis is an individualistic form of this. A human being has trauma, unknowing, pain of someone they've lost, lack. So these are all lacks. You've lost somebody you love. You don't have the answers. You feel a lack of meaning, whatever, right? You have a lack within you. You try to avoid that as much as possible. So you close that down, you party, you do whatever. You try to avoid looking at that trauma and that lack, right? That then creates symptoms. Symptoms are where the thing that you are not speaking finds a way to speak. So you get migraines, you get a bad back, you get fatigue. Sometimes that's biological. Sometimes the doctor can't find anything wrong with you because maybe it's actually a psychopathology. It's a way of your body telling you something you're not actually able to admit to yourself. So the symptom becomes the concrete manifestation of the lack that you're not looking at, the loss of someone you love, the kind of the doubt, unknowing, the fear of death, whatever it is. The symptom becomes the concrete manifestation. And then you think to yourself, if I just got rid of the symptom, I'd be better. Like if I could cut it out like a cancer and remove it, everything would be great. But the problem is you can't, because the symptom speaks of something very, very central to your being. If you can get rid of one symptom, another one will arise. Alcoholism might be a symptom, right? Now, if you get rid of alcoholism, but you don't work out why you're an alcoholic, what it's covering over, what trauma maybe helped you go to alcohol. Because a lot of people drink to manage anxiety. And anxiety is the feeling of a lack within. So by drinking, your anxiety levels go down. But then the drinking causes all sorts of other problems. But if you get rid of the alcohol and you haven't looked at the anxiety, you'll take up something even worse, like CrossFit. If you've heard of CrossFit, my goodness, that's even more terrible. You live in LA, it's like disaster. My goodness. I mean, the Irish, we would never do that. That would be just ridiculous. We'll stick with alcoholism. Thank you very much. So, it's like whack-a-mole with your symptoms. You hit your one symptom down and another one erupts. And you hit that one down and another one erupts. Because until you deal with the anxiety and work through the anxiety, symptoms will continue to find a way to speak. You get a massage and your back kind of gets a bit better, but then your legs are aching or your arms are aching. It moves around, it continues to speak. In the same way, there's societal symptoms. A society that paints itself as a city on a hill and everything's great and everything's wonderful needs enemies. It needs a scapegoat. It needs someone to blame. It needs some problem out there that if only we could get rid of that, then everything would be great. Even if it's a good thing, even if only we could get rid of the homeless population in LA. Let's what do we do? Give people blankets, try and do job stuff, whatever. But if we get rid of the homelessness in LA, then something that would be better. But what if the homelessness in LA can't be gotten rid of until you realize that there's something in the very economic fabric of LA that generates homelessness? Homelessness is not the problem, it's the solution to a problem. And the problem is in society itself. Like in LA, my goodness, you need money to survive. I'm looking around at people from LA. It's like it's a tough world here in LA. And I think partly it runs, my theory is, having been here for a year, that it runs on lots of people coming here and then it just chews them up, takes their money and spits them out. And that's kind of like how it runs. And there's only a very tiny amount of people who can actually stay here, and make it work. And they do it by basically this mass of people coming in and being destroyed, which is a bit of a metaphor of capitalism itself, maybe. So psychoanalytically, the idea is you listen to the symptom. The symptom speaks a truth that you cannot speak. It tells you of a lack that you have to work with and work around and whatever. And if you're able to work through that, the symptom begins to diminish. So the symptom becomes and I've talked about this before using Lacan, Lacan writes symptom in an old-fashioned way, S-I-N-T-H-O-M-E, and it sounds like symptôme. So in French, symptom, symptôme. And symptôme sounds exactly the same as holy man. And holy man is a prophet. And a prophet is someone who has a message that if you listen to, you will find transformation. And if you refuse to listen to, you're screwed. Right? So the symptom is like a prophet that's saying, if you listen to the symptom and you listen to why it's there and you work out why it's there, and you don't just say, oh, it's because, you know, you don't try to find a simplistic reason. You don't scapegoat. You find, what is it saying about society? What is the corrupt part of the society? And then you try to address that. You can dissipate the symptom. You know, and that's that. And so in the same way you do that as an individual, in pyrotheology, I'm arguing that that's kind of what Christianity is doing at a political level. It's looking at the symptoms in society. It might be outbursts of racism, and it go like, okay, we can't just throw out a few bad apples. In Northern Ireland, our police force was called the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. And as part of the peace process in 1998, the whole police force was disbanded. And it was a new police force was put in place called the PSNI. Because the police force was seen as irredeemably militarized and sectarian. Structurally speaking, it was militarized because, of course, it grew up within the Troubles. I mean, police were getting murdered, so our police force didn't drive police cars. You know, they drove military-style vehicles. Our police force in the UK, police don't have weapons. You know, most of the police don't have weapons, but in Northern Ireland they did, which is a big deal. But I know in America that's weird. Like, how can you have a police force that don't have weapons? But in the UK, like, the regular police on the street don't carry guns. But in Northern Ireland, our police have, you know, serious weaponry. Even now, if you go to Northern Ireland, our police stations still look like military bases because they were bombed all the time. Right? But it was as part of the peace process. It was like, yeah, it's a militarized police force. It's not a case of making a few small changes. And it was seen as irredeemably sectarian in that it was mostly made up of loyalists, Protestant loyalists. And there was a whole pile of reasons why that was the case. But that was no longer acceptable. That wasn't acceptable in a post-conflict Northern Ireland. So it wasn't like 2 or 3 bad apples had to be got rid of. It was like structurally the whole thing had to change. Yeah, I don't know why I was mentioning that, but oh yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it has some relevance. Yeah, so very concretely then, I'll say there's 2 things that we developed in ICON to try to enact the very thing we're thinking about, because that's all very abstract. The idea of the symptom, universality, we're all kind of outsiders in ourselves. Because, by the way, and this is one thing Catherine is concerned about, because in this it can sound like, you know, like, okay, so identity isn't important, you know, so one's identities kind of like are insignificant. It's all lives matter, right? You know, it's not like Black Lives Matter, or it's not like there's some group that is the universal. But here's the thing within this theory. Within this theory, the universal is always embodied in a particular group that is, symbolically speaking, on the outside. So to speak of the universal is to identify who is the proletariat, who is the complete outsider. They are the site of transformation. They are the universal. And so in a sense, it's saying that in any historical epoch, that might be women, that might be Black people, it might be the Irish, it might be, I don't know, whatever. So there's different times, there will be different groups that precisely in their identity, they are excluded from the public square, either explicitly, like in apartheid, or implicitly, where, you know, you're just not allowed into shops. You're always being escorted out of places. You know, you live in a trailer park and you go into the city and you're just, everything is, you're not welcome there, right? So and that, from this perspective, is you are the outsider and therefore the site of change. And by the way, the reason for that is Marx says the proletariat is the site of change because they experience the violence of the system more than anybody else. so prisoners or whatever, they experience the violence of society more so than anybody in society in ways that I will never experience. So they know the violence of it. So they have the potential of actually showing us our own violence to ourselves. If we can work with and within prison systems, et cetera, we can help to hear the voice of the other and see what it's saying to us. And if we listen to that call and make a change, then something positive will happen. So the two ways we did this in ICON was one through what's called the Evangelism Project, where we went to be evangelized by other people. And we tried to choose groups that many of us would see as the complete outsider. Like it might be the Humanist Society, it might be the Islamic Society, it might be Scientology. We did all of those and many more. Who are the outsiders? And we would go to them and we would listen to, what they believed and what they thought. But the evangelism didn't happen then. The evangelism happened when we asked, what do we look like to you? What is it like to be a Muslim in Belfast? And then you saw yourself through the outsider's eyes, the symbolic outsider, the one who is not welcomed. So in Northern Ireland, there was a lot of, there still is a lot of sectarianism and a lot of hatred towards anyone who is seen as an outsider. The Polish, because there are a lot of Polish in Northern Ireland. Whenever there was a lot of money coming in, a lot of Polish came over and were working on building sites, etc. And there's a lot of violence directed against ethnic minorities. But we would go and you go like, so what's it like? And then you would see yourself and you would see that you're participating in a society that is doing violence to others. And the hope is that that encounter with the other would decenter us and help us to, engage in a more healthy way in making sure that we can get rid of racism. Now, this is why we call them decentering practices, by the way. The Last Supper was similar. A friend of mine, Luke Crisp, he might actually be watching this. He runs Last Supper events in Tasmania in Australia, and he brings together people in Tasmania who would be seen as complete outsiders. He brings together people who are like transgender rights activists. He brings together he brings people who are like gay, lesbian rights activists, and in Tasmania, a lot of people would find that to be too much. They are the outsider, and you sit down at a table over a meal. And it's playfully called the Last Supper because if you don't like what the person says, it's their Last Supper, right? But it's also they are the side of Christ. They sit on the side of Christ and the seat of Christ, and they bring truth. And we listen to them, and we listen to where they're coming from, and we look at ourselves through the other's eyes, and it decenters us. Again, hopefully, not if you do it once. If you do one evangelism project, it doesn't do anything. It's just a fun night. But if you do that once a month for a year, or you do the Last Suppers once a month for a year, it can begin to sensitize us to our own implicit biases or our own implicit sectarianisms or racisms or sexisms, things that we may not kind of be very conscious of, but can come to light through engaging in these practices. So that's the decentering practices part of Pyrotheology. And the other part was Transformance Art, where we tried to create a space where for 1 hour we would poke at the dominant kind of like belief systems and identity structures within Northern Ireland. We would poke and we would prod them, and we would try to create a space where, symbolically speaking, we met each other beyond our Catholic and Protestant identities. Now, I think the reason why this is more problematic now that I've moved to America is because in Northern Ireland, we were all, to greater or lesser extents, fucked. Right? I mean, there's like 3,500 people were killed. 30,000 people, I think, were maimed, in violence. This is a population of 1.5 million. So everybody knew people who were killed or who were maimed. And that's not to mention people who'd lost their jobs, people forced out of their homes, people forced to flee to the UK, not including people who couldn't get jobs because of the economic environment, or people who were in bomb scares or in bombs but weren't actually injured. I mean, everybody was affected. Whether you were Protestant or Catholic, if you were like a working class Protestant on the Shankill Road or working class Catholic on the Falls Road, these two roads, working class roads, where lots of the violence took place, and they were parallel to each other pretty much. And there was a wall, and 5 foot, not even 5, like your garden would go to the wall, and on the other side of the wall was the garden of the other side, the other community. So Protestant on one side, a Catholic on the other side, bottles, petrol bombs, things like that being thrown over these walls, regular violence. So the idea of us all entering a space where we all kind of lay down symbolically our identities, listen to the other, and see that we share certain things, and that we're all being screwed over by kind of the system, right? Kind of was easier than it is, I think, in a system where there is some group who are like very much taking the place of the oppressed, right? So that does bring a different kind of dimension to it. But I still think there's a real place for this what's called the epoche, the suspended space in our lives where we encounter the other for us. We encounter the outsider, and we are encouraged to critique our own identities, particularly if we have dominant identities that give us a lot more power than others. A place where that is critiqued. But the primary role for me of pyrotheology is to remind ourselves that those who are the complete outsiders, the oppressed in our society, they are the site of the divine, theologically speaking. To use theological language, the site of the divine. In Marxist language, they are the site of revolutionary transformation, right? It's kind of basically the same thing, right? Because they are the ones who feel the violence directly of the system. Now, that doesn't mean they can do anything about it, because that community may lack the weapons or the educational background or the whatever to do something. So that's why in one sense it's about politicizing the outsider and not even helping that to happen within that culture. So this is in psychoanalysis is called weaponizing the hysteric, right? So what happens in analysis is, if you're a typical neurotic, you go into analysis and you go, I don't know if my partner loves me. I don't know if I love them. I don't know if I like my job. I don't know if I don't. I don't know, should I be doing something else? Should be something better? That's, which is fine. That's most people, right? But think of Woody Allen as the obvious neurotic, right? So you've got all of these questions, but it doesn't go anywhere. These questions just haunt you. They just depress you. They just screw up your relationships, right? What the analyst does is they try to weaponize that discontent for the good. And by weaponize, I kind of like the violence of the term, because it is in the sense of violence. It's not a violence against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. It's a violence against a system that you're in, which is oppressing you. So they take this questioning and they go, right, let's listen to it. Let's listen to your body. And let's listen to all of that stuff. And what's it telling us? Was telling us that actually there is something that you need to, to change. Now, the other thing you're doing is you're teaching the person, well, in analysis, the analyst is in one sense helping you enjoy your hysteria, right? They're helping you enjoy your questioning. It's quite fun when you're in analysis and you start to ask yourself these questions and someone actually listens to you for a change, and you learn that, oh, this could be good. This is not just some horrible thing that I'm riven with all these questions. I feel dissatisfied. This is great. I could change my job, make it a bit better. I could change my relationship. I could do, and so it not only becomes the fuel. This may be a nicer way to put it. It's the fuel which feeds a change in your life. But you also learn to enjoy it. So it's the site of revolution and enjoyment. So those are the two things that the symptom becomes. At first, it's the site of like pain and unhappiness, right? That it's the very thing that's stopping anything from changing, right? But you just change how you look at it, and it becomes a site of making real changes in yourself, and you start to enjoy it. You start to go, right, we can make a change. Politically speaking, it's similar. It's like you take the societal symptom, which is the site of, violence. So I say it's racism, structural racism and violence within the police force or judicial system. You take that and you listen to it and you say, there's a problem that it's telling us about. We can actually change society. We can make society better. If we listen to what that's saying about us, are we denying our own shadow side, our own darkness? Are we saying that our society is pure and good and we're not looking at our history? We're not working through all of that stuff? Okay, we're going to have to start doing that. Right, let's do it. And let's find creative ways to do that. Let's really kind of, enjoy making change in society. The symptom then becomes something that is the site of revolution and the site of enjoyment. And also it begins to dissipate ultimately as society begins to change. Whew. Did that make any sense? Right, okay, there you go. There's my bit. First of all, around the table. Hey, how's it going? Sorry, Sylvie, you missed it, but you're here now.
Yeah, I was lost.
Oh, sorry.
I went to Los Angeles and came back.
All right, you got the worst seat in the house, I'm afraid.
Oh.
Yeah. So, any questions or thoughts around the table?
Well, this reminded me of an interview I read with John Caputo a long time ago, where he was asked about Rachel Dolezal, the girl who saying she was transracial, white woman saying she was actually black. And he said, I can only assume her intentions were good, but I think she was misguided. You can't be an intentional victim. Adopt it freely, because that means you're always free to walk away from it if the going gets rough. Take a few weeks off or a holiday or just change your mind. So it ends up making a mockery of the oppressed. The biting edge of oppression is that it is not of your own choosing. People who try to walk around the shoes of others to live among and dedicate their lives to working with the oppressed are also sensitive to the fact of their privilege.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, like, it could become so easy, especially the more privileged you are, to just like get in that and be like, oh, yeah, I have minority friends, and just to make them feel better. But how do we walk that line so that we don't become like that?
Yes. Yeah.
Or is
yeah.
honest.
Yeah. I know. And this is, by the way, like what I haven't even been able to touch on, but like, why did I write a personal piece in this and not do this theoretical stuff? And in some respects, I wanted to show that this is all grounded in my personal experience of like growing up in Northern Ireland, of living in this squat in Belfast, of engaging with homelessness there, and is not some sort of abstract thing. But we didn't even talk about that. Maybe we'll get to that for a little bit. But it's sensitive. It's difficult as well to talk about this, because everything you can say can be critiqued. This is the other thing I hate about critical theory. I mean, I did philosophy and I'm not a big fan. Like, there's an example of Jeb Bush. I think recently, once Donald Trump, that tape came out where he was like saying, terrible things. I will not repeat on this in case this is for posterity. Maybe 100 years from now, someone will actually transcribe this, so I don't want to say. And Jeb Bush said, I have 2 daughters, I have a wife. I think this is a terrible thing to say. I can't support them, whatever, something like that. But then this whole backlash happened, which is kind of right, and also I think not right. But the kind of right said, oh, so it's only because you've got 2 daughters and a wife that you think it's bad, right? So if you didn't have 2 daughters and a wife, then you'd be fine about it, right? And I was thinking, that's a bit disingenuous. Like, I can understand, like, he did say that, but it's like critical theories like that. There's a game in critical theory called, I'm more left than you. And anybody who's been in like philosophy in Europe and probably in America, you'll know this game. And the game is always to show how this leftist isn't leftist enough and that you're more leftist. And then the next person's job is to show that, no, you're not really leftist and they're more leftist. And it's a never ending game. It's like turtles all the way down, right? It's a problem finding a good language for this. What I kind of want to say is, I think we live in a society where the losers lose twice and the winners lose once. Even the winners lose. Now, so and that's kind of what I'm saying. So the losers lose twice. So if you are excluded and you're at the cold face of violence being done to you. You're a prisoner. You're living homeless in Venice Beach. You are like you're being destroyed and oppressed. But the crazy thing is, and it sounds awful to say this in a sense, but it's like I think even the winners lose in our society. Like I think I've said this before, but I for 4 years lived because I got a grant from a private foundation from a very generous family who wanted to support my work. But I got to live in a very wealthy place for 4 years. I got lent this house and it was beautiful. I had a house in Belfast, my little house. You could fit the whole house of my house in the living room of the house that I was borrowing for a few years. And the house I was borrowing had a house within it. I mean, it was like Russian dolls. Right? It was like ridiculous. But I met people some wonderful people, and some just like life, but people who are incredibly wealthy, who had everything. And the levels of, first of all, there were some people who were profoundly happy, but the ones who I knew who were profoundly happy were giving themselves to social causes. That's the truth. They were really involved in stuff. I knew one guy in particular who was bankrupting himself basically, but really, really involved. But there was so much depression, so many therapists, so much Prozac being taken. And LA's funny, like they say there's Prozac in the water, in the tap. That's why I drink it. That's why I don't do bottled water. I want the Prozac. But I think there's so many people taking it. I don't know if it's true, but it's actually trace elements in the water. I can imagine it's true because in LA, where I've seen and met, in fact, I know an actress. I met her in Tucson. I can't remember where, Chicago or something. She came to an event. She's this well-known actress. I hadn't heard of her because I'm crap with remembering anybody. But she lived in LA for years, and she had the lifestyle, and she left and she went to South Bend, Indiana is where I met her. And she moved back to South Bend, Indiana, and she's doing amazing work there. But she said, I had it all. I had all the money. I had all the stuff that everybody says if you have, you'll be happy. And she said, I was absolutely miserable. Now, so in one sense, I want Christianity to be a type of way of seeing that we live in a system where even the winners lose and the losers lose even worse. And to try to dream of other systems and better systems, but this is where I have to come in with the second part. But the people who will change that are the people who are the nobodies and the nothings in the system. They are the site of real transformation. They are the divine. That's what real protest is. Real protest is when people rise up and say, we are experiencing the violence of the society at its worst. We are experiencing the destruction, and we will be heard. And so protests arise. Systems try to push the protest down. They try to domesticate it. You can protest, just don't stop the cars, just don't damage anything, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, protest, but in a way where we'll never notice you're protesting, right? But true protest disrupts, it disturbs, it puts a spanner in the works of the system. And that then eventually, if the protesters aren't killed or silenced, which sadly often happens, but if the protesters can continue to bring it to the surface, it can change society, and everyone benefits. I mean, I think everyone benefits from the proletariat rising up and changing things. Is that, I don't know. So good.
I'm going to try not to cry, but my daughter called me yesterday and she said, Mom, what did you do today? And I said, well, I went to the AA telephone line and I did that. And I started telling her about the people I had met there. And she said, can I just tell you something? I said, what? And she said, I was in West Oakland. I was on the way to the beach with my dog. And all of a sudden, someone started screaming, stop, stop, stop. You've got to help me. You've got to help me. And it was this black kid with blood on his face, and he was holding his chin up. And she said, what do you want? Do you want money? What do you want? And he says, no, you've got to get me out of here. Let me get in your car and get me out of here because they're chasing me. And so she said, get in the car. And I said, well, what did you do? She says, I don't know. She says, Mom, I don't know what I did. God did it. But we finally got to the police station and we got him an ambulance to take him to the hospital. And she says, I was just so scared that they were following us right up there. But I couldn't not do it. something bigger than me came over me, and I did it.
Yeah.
And the dog was scared. The little dog was scared. We were all scared, and we got there.
Wow. This happened today?
This happened yesterday.
Yesterday. Wow.
In West Auckland.
Wow.
And it was just, she said nothing has ever happened to her like that in her life, because she's gone to Honduras and done stuff down there. She says this was just like, but I said, were you scared? She says, Mother, you couldn't even be scared. You just went, I know. Just
Yeah.
God was with us. And he was praying, the kid was praying.
Wow. Wow. Whew.
So sometimes, but I mean, that doesn't happen to us every day. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously we're not going to be able to do that every day. We're not going to go down.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the rules that I think we talked about this last week. I'm not sure, but the two rules of the church for me are, one, to sensitize us to the call of the other, and then two is help us to take responsibility for what we do when we hear that call. So that's a good example of hearing the call of the other, but that call is screaming at you when someone's standing there pleading. Oh, and by the way, but in terms of the winners losing as well, I haven't read it, but I don't know if anyone's read The Spirit Level. I mean, it's quite a controversial book that came out, but it argued sociologically that societies where there's more equity between rich and poor, everyone benefits. The happiness level of everybody rises. The life expectancy of everybody rises. But when you have a greater level of that difference between the rich and the poor, the life expectancy of both diminishes, not just the poor, but also the rich. And the happiness level of both diminishes, not just the poor, but also the rich. So of course, you kind of, in one sense, you don't expect that. In one sense, you think, okay, with great diversity, the life expectancy of the very rich is going to go up and the happiness up, and vice versa, the poor, more unhappy. But they find that weirdly that the more, and of course they're looking at some European countries, but the more there is equality, the more it actually benefits everybody. Obviously, it benefits the poor much more, like in terms of physically and so. But ultimately, weirdly, everybody benefits from it.
What was it called?
The Spirit Level. Can't remember the authors. There's two authors, but yeah, it's very good. Rob Bell loves it. He loves that book. He's like, he's the man for that. Well, here, by the way, thank you. Randall says, just want to make sure you're recording. I am. Hopefully I did click. There's no questions from you guys. Is that because I was just like so clear and so brilliant? Or or the Q&A is not working again? Please don't say that, because that would be so depressing. But if you have a question, write it down and I'll open it again to the table while I'm waiting for something to come up. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions, concerns?
I'm not totally clear yet on losing twice and losing once.
Oh, yeah. There's a great book that I love called Enjoying What You Don't Have by Todd McGowan, and it's very, very good. But he talks about this, and he has some very good ways of describing it. But the reason why you say you lose twice is that actually, I mean, it sounds weird to say, but although it doesn't if you've read my work in a way, but if you get everything you want, it leads to melancholia, not happiness. Like to have a lot of, well, it's a whole pile of reasons why, but if you look at just the amount of antidepressants taken by the wealthy, the amount of therapy being done by the wealthy, et cetera, there's this sense in which what we say is winning in our society definitely makes you more comfortable. It means you're not susceptible to violence. It means that there's a whole pile of things that you don't get, but it doesn't seem to lead to an enjoyable, existentially rich existence. So you lose once. The poor lose twice, in the sense of they lose because they are the brunt of the violence of the system. They experience the eruption of the violence. There is one other dimension, but which is I haven't mentioned because it's kind of difficult. But some people say that, but the truth is the proletariat, the complete outsiders, also have access to a pleasure that the people in the system don't have access to. because they have no symbolic value within the system. And the idea is symbolic value doesn't really lead to anything. It's all symbolic. You buy a fancy car and you think, oh yeah, I'm going to be really powerful because I got a fancy car. And then the symbolism just diminishes. Whereas when you are forced out of the very system that gives value and meaning, you're forced to find value and meaning in a kind of more immediate way. And this is why, like Mother Teresa said that she felt that America had a poverty that Calcutta didn't have. And also, if you meet people who work in Haiti and that kind of thing, that people will often say, and it's difficult, but they'll go like, man, there's something about the communities that has a warmth and a joy that seems to be missing from, you know, a country like the US. But that's not to say, it's not to say the romantic kind of, oh yes, the poor are much happier, they've got something. But from this Lacanian perspective, it's whenever you've been completely excluded from the system, you're kind of like, all you have is your community, your friendships, all of that. And so you have a potential for a form of life. But that whenever you're really rich and you're really fancy house and you've got the swimming pool and you've got the 2 hot tubs and the plane, but you know, you're just sitting there isolated and feel existentially empty. That's why in this book, The Spirit Level says that, and that they're arguing, not philosophically, they're arguing statistically. They're saying that whenever you have more equality, the people who are richer get happier, who are less rich, and the people who are poorer are happier because they're not the brunt of violence and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, Seneca, I think, said it. He said, you know, to be too wealthy or too poor are 2 injustices. But I want to add to say one's a much more terrible injustice than the other. But yeah. But I do want to say, like, the reason why Catherine Sarah Moody and others are rightfully concerned about this is because, of course, it's like, one is they're going, well, a lot of people, their identities have been so marginalized that there is this thing of, you know, you claim an identity because your identity has been so marginalized in society, and the idea of holding that lightly or saying I'm not fully my identity is problematic. And the thing is, I want to agree with that, and I simply want to say yes, but that's it. It's like the most oppressed identities are the concrete manifestation of the no identity. So in a sense, you're not asking a person to lay down their identity. If you're Black and you're in a very racist society, your identity is the place of no place. You're the person you're the pirate of like during the era of Jack Sparrow and all of that. You're the nobody and the nothing, and so your identity is, in a sense, the embodiment of the nothingness of society, and therefore it's a privileged space. But there's no questions coming up, so obviously the Q&A thing's not working. I'm really sorry, but you can throw in questions in the chat box if anybody has. Otherwise, any thoughts, questions, critiques, concerns? Any concerns about all of what's been said?
One of the things I thought of is the common criticism of altruism is that altruism is ultimately selfish. And I think about that when you talk about like how when we go and help the oppressed, they're there to convert us or to help us. But I wonder, is that bad? Like, and I wonder if people say, because I could imagine certain scenarios where they just are full of themselves and like, look how much I help people.
I know. And well, yeah, and this is Zizek's critique, and I just read about this the other day. I was just reading about this, and I think there's something to it, and it connects with what you're saying. So he critiques Emmanuel Levinas, and he critiques Emmanuel Levinas because Emmanuel Levinas has this view, which I think is very, very good, but there might be a problem. And his view is that the chosen people, generally, whoever the chosen people are, right? If we use the term chosen people, that usually means we have more rights and less responsibilities. Right. So if you're the party in power, that means you've got the rights, and if you're special because you're better than everybody else, right? So the Nazis or whatever are like the chosen by destiny, by history. Now Levinas draws out this really interesting thing within Judaism, which is to be a chosen people is not to have more rights but more responsibilities. So that to be the chosen people, the Jewish community is a community that has more responsibility to their neighbors. They feel this great responsibility, and I really like that, because then when you read Levinas, you have this incredible thing of like, he says, he quotes Dostoevsky, we are all responsible for each other, but I am more responsible than everyone else. However, what does Zizek say about that? He says, well, that can lead to a sense of, it's kind of weirdly a reverse type of chosen people. You're special because you're like so giving and so kind and so this or whatever. So you're special because you have this extra call on your life. I'm more responsible than everyone else. Sounds very altruistic, but it's kind of like I had this when I was a young Christian. I remember walking around graveyards thinking and feeling that I had to save people from hell, from death. So I'd walk around graveyards and I would take on this responsibility. And it was both quite depressing, but strangely also it made me feel really special. I had this incredible responsibility. I was more responsible than everybody else for helping save people or whatever. Now I haven't fully worked that out yet, but that's what I hear. It says if you do this reversal and you go, well, we go to hear from the other, and then are we just not again at the center of everything? So, Zizek says it like this. He says, there used to be what was called white man's burden. White man's burden is a little bit similar to the Zizek. White man's burden meant we're going to India or whatever, and we have to bring civilization, and that is our burden as Europeans, right? We are burdened with bringing civilization, right? And then he says, but then there's white man's shame. He says, which is a sense of saying, like, I am completely responsible for everything that's happened in the world or whatever. He says, these are kind of both the same. Both of them, I am the center. I haven't decentered myself. So there could be something in that of going like, well, would it be dangerous for the types of communities that I'm talking about that we still somehow, because in one sense, my view of the church is the place where you become part of it to be evangelized. You enter the church to be the one who is transformed by the other, to be critiqued, to listen to the prophets that speaks, and to respond to that message, to be transformed, which is good news, because that will make a better, healthier group, a better, healthier community. It's good news, but it will be painful as well, So that's my kind of vision of the church. But I think you're asking a really interesting question. If I hear you right and you're saying, well, does that not just invert everything and we're still central? So someone else can.
You're feeling good because you're doing something for them.
Yeah, so we're
Spanish, we say, don't pour the poor, so that you can feel good by giving them something. You're a real bitch, but when you do that, you're really wonderful.
Yes.
It's a bunch of shit.
Yes. How do you decenter? And I think probably things like AA are the places where this is lived out concretely. That's the other reason why I went to practical examples in my essay. And I didn't talk about, I want to tell you all about Tate's Modern, and I want to tell you all about that place I lived and all the craziness of it. But we were working this stuff out in practice, where really we were being critiqued by each other. And in AA, I'm guessing you're critiqued by each other. You're decentered all the time. You don't go in with pride into something like that. You go in there because you feel broken. Yeah. So I think there's so much more to learn from the 12-step programs. Instead of having a triumphalist type of pyrotheological church where we go in to be evangelized and be transformed, there's a sense in which it should sensitize us to our brokenness, the brokenness that we are part of, and to sensitize us to the voice of the other who can bring healing and salvation to us.
I'm curious about this comparison of universalism and pyrotheology.
Yes.
And kind of some different ideas, I think, because typically I would always think of universalism, and obviously there's many different ways, because it's kind of this idea of all inclusiveness, so it can be pretty broad. So even the ideas of, I guess, pure universalism, where maybe everybody's right. Maybe everybody has the own thing and it's all good.
Yes.
In a very boiled down way. But I'm wondering how we draw some universalist conclusions from pyrotheology.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're talking about is a different type of universalism. So universalism obviously means covers everybody. And say the conservatives, universal Christianity, universal message. Some people get in, some people go to hell. The liberals, universal message, everyone gets in. I have loads of problems with that actually, because it's like we're right, and eventually the Buddhists will realize it, and the humanists, and it's fine. They can think what they think, but eventually they'll be having supper with Jesus and us, and it'll all be great. But everyone gets in. But using some of the philosophers I use who have written on the Apostle Paul, they say he's got this very different type of universalism, which he calls the trash of the world. We are the trash, the nobodies, and the nothing of the world. That to identify with the crucifixion is to identify with the loss of our various identities. And the reason why it's universal is, one, that's a universal message because I think because it relates to all of us. Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. It's like saying the lack you will always have with you. You'll always have poverty within you, and you've only got two choices. Put it onto someone else and ignore it in yourself, or look at it in yourself, and then doing that, you dissipate its power. So if you go with this idea, it's a universal message because it says, whoever we are, whatever system we believe in, to be human is to experience lack and loss and all of that stuff. And we either embrace that as societies and as individuals, or we don't. And if we don't, violence results, violence erupts. And it's also universal in the sense of the Sartrean point. I mean, you might not go with it, you might not think it's right, but if you go with the Sartrean point, Sartre saying this message that we are not at one with ourselves relates to the Parisian waiter and the French farmer and the German peasant, and it's part of the very ontology, the very essence of being human, is to not have an essence, Sartre would say. That's what existentialism actually means. Existentialism for Sartre means existence comes before essence, which means it's kind of, so existentialism is a critique of identity politics. If you have to put them, they are kind of at war with each other, because existentialism is always saying we do have identities, we are in identities, identities form us and we are formed by them, but it's always saying that those identities we transcend. And so my friend Phil Harrison, he wrote a parable that gets to the heart of what I mean by universalism. When he was like 18 years old, he had this kind of waking dream, and he said he dreamt, or he imagined himself being at the big gates of heaven, these heavy set wooden doors, and he's waiting, and then the door creaks open and St. Peter's there, this rugged man, unshaven, and he says, "Oh, Phil, you're here at last. Welcome in, come on." And Phil's about to step over the threshold, and he looks behind him and he sees some other people, some of his friends, some atheists, some Buddhists, some God knows what, he says. And then he looks at St. Peter, he looks at heaven, and he looks behind him, and none of these people are speaking. They can't speak. They're silent. And he says, "What about them?" And St. Peter says, "I'm sorry, you know the rules, only the right ones." And Phil said at that point, he said, I took stock of my main influence, Jesus, at the time. He said, Jesus, the outsider, the sinner, the friend of sinners, the drunkard, the bastard, the sinner, right? And he said, this voice within me arose, and I was like, you know what? I'll just stay out here with them. And he said it was almost like I could see a smile break on St. Peter's face and this voice say, "At last." And then he said that was his exit from Christianity. He said he had that and he was gone. He was out. And he's gone on to do amazing things since. He's got a novel coming out. He directed this great movie called The Good Man you should watch. But then years later, I've talked to Phil about it, and Phil's like, technically I thought that was my exit from Christianity, but he says maybe that was my brief moment where I understood what it was about. that actually I not going in, but identifying with the outside and staying with the outsiders is the heart of the gospel. That's the universal message for us all. We identify with the outsider, and we identify with that part of the outsider within us. And in that, we work to the betterment of society. Even Mother Teresa has it, where she says, if they ever make me a saint, she says, I will be a saint of darkness. You will not find me in heaven. I will be outside with a lamp lighting the way. But, so, it's 50-50 because she's lighting the way into heaven. But Mother Teresa, the last thing she wants to be is in heaven. She's like, you'll never find me. If you make me a saint, you're never going to find me in heaven. That's the last place you'll ever find me. I'll be in the darkness. Thanks very much. That's where I want to be, helping people. All right. Well, I'm going to finish off this official bit. Okay. There's one question. Can the decentering transformation take place within the church, or does it have to take place outside of the church? I'm asking this thinking about the types of people who I find are attracted to your work, and the mainly post-evangelical people I hang out with, who tend to be generally similar with not much otherness. Oh yeah, I know, it's true. Well, it's all of us like tend to, sameness, we all like it. I mean, I have a tendency to want to block people on Facebook who have different views than me, because it gets, especially around this time, come on, like, my goodness, it's crazy, but then what do I want? Do I want a Facebook where everybody's like agreeing with me and not challenging me? But yeah, there's a lot of sameness, you're right. I think this is mostly happening probably outside the church. Well, my kind of definition of church is broad. I want to almost say wherever this is happening is church, in the sense of it's the spirit of Christianity. It's what's happening. So wherever this type of thing's happening, Occupy Wall Street, Ferguson, wherever it's happening is where it's happening. And sometimes all we have to do is find it, divine it. Like, you're looking for water with your divining sticks. Find where it's happening and join. And then there's some of us here who want to start it, as in like help within our communities to make it happen. And I think that's totally legitimate as well. But I do want to almost say, like, the church is not what we see at the end of the street. It could be, or it might not be. Church is where this is lived. And where it's lived in any historical epoch is different. They see the arrogance of someone like me. I was always and is always is like, I can be the site of transformation and revolution. I want to be there. Maybe I can't. Maybe it's not going to be me. That's like, for coming from an evangelical charismatic thing. I was only there for a little while, but when I was in that, there was this sense of, I'm part of the chosen people. Like I have this. I'm going to be part of the revolutionary change in the world. But more so now, I go like, maybe I'm the best thing I can do is not get in the way. That's terrifying. Like, but it's because I go like, why do I get to live in LA and do these classes and drink my gin and do all that and be the site of real change? That's probably going to be happening in shanty towns. That's probably going to be happening when workers in a sweatshop get together and protest and someone gets killed. And and maybe sometimes they called them honest intellectuals. I think in Russia, were basically the honest, and they didn't think there were many of them, but the honest intellectual was just going to try and not get in the way, not be an asshole, and when the revolution's happening, try and lean into it. So lean into what's going on, but don't think for a moment that you're really going to make the change. That's for the people who are really oppressed. They're really broken. Like that's where it's going to be happening. And you lend whatever you can to it. Lean into that. But sorry, it's a fly buzzing around. And of course, there's part of me that resists that, but that's probably where I kind of am at the moment. I just don't want to let myself off the hook with that. That's the last thing. I don't want to say, well, I can't do anything, so just get out of the way. Because I want to go, okay, yeah, I probably am not the site of where real change is going to happen, but can I lean into it? Can I support? A lot of it is looking at the weather. And whenever you see things changing and you see opportunities, you go into them. And sometimes the opportunities aren't there. Maybe you have to wait for years. Marx was big into that. I was like, don't have the revolution before I finish Capital. He says, it's like, no, wait up, don't go too quick. You'll do it wrong. But it's like sometimes you wait and then you see something. Like, for example, I don't know, with Occupy. Suddenly something happens and you turn on the TV and all these people are gathering in various cities and you're like, what the hell? Where did that happen? But it's happening. You go, okay, all I can do is lean into that. I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to try and do something. So, if you can start it, great.
Should we resource it? Because that's what you said they're lacking oftentimes, is the resources.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, absolutely. That might be a way to do it, to resource it with our skills or money or that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's kind of what the honest intellectual was, I think, in Russia. Is like they have the skill of kind of, their resource is intellectual resource, and that can be of use. The intellectual resource can be a terrible thing as well. That's why some things I hate about critical theory, why I never became a university lecturer. But it can also be a great resource if you use it in the right way. And so, resources can be, that's what we can give. Yeah. Very good. I feel like I'm waffling now, so I'm going to let you people go. I'm not letting these people go. They have to have another drink before we all head off and watch the debate tonight. I hope you got something out of it. Remember, give me your thoughts on Facebook. This, I think, is the most contentious issue, because this all comes down to who is the oppressed, what is our role, can we be allies, should we step back, should we speak, or is that using our kind of replicating the very problem? Is there oppression even within the winners of society? What does that mean? What is all these questions that are being played out in the popular world at the moment, that you see being played out in social media? These are the questions that are being asked, and we've just scratched the surface. But the questions we've looked at are, who are the oppressed? How do we listen to the oppressed? How do we respond to oppression? What is our role? How implicated are we in oppression? How much can we divorce ourselves from that? How can we create communities that bring life? And how can we enjoy, this is the big thing for me, how can we enjoy transforming society? That's very, very key. I just finished with this. Jung said, the purpose of psychoanalysis is not to integrate you into society. The purpose of psychoanalysis at the best is to help you enjoy change in your society, to help you find enjoyment in being discontented. So it's not about drawing you out of it completely. A lot of people go to therapy because they don't fit in, but it's not about, like, some cognitive therapies are about how to get you to work better, how to get you to, so kind of get you to integrate into society better. But actually, for psychoanalysis, the idea is, how can you become a productive member of society, meaning an instrument of change and transformation? And that's a question that I really want to address in my own life. Okay, love you all. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good.